Al Pacino grew up hungry in the South Bronx during the 1940s and 1950s, where winters cut through thin walls like knives, and hope was something you had to fight for every single day. Born on April 25, 1940, to a Sicilian family that had more dreams than money, his father walked out before young Alfredo could even speak, leaving behind a wound in his heart that no amount of applause or success would ever completely heal. His mother Rose became everything to him, raising him alone in cramped apartments that always smelled of damp and desperation, where the rent was perpetually late and the radiators coughed and sputtered but never quite managed to warm the rooms properly. They were desperately poor, the kind of poverty that gnaws at you constantly, where some nights dinner consisted of nothing more than a piece of bread soaked in watered-down milk, and young Al would chew slowly to make it last longer, while his mother smiled and pretended she wasn't hungry, even though her hands trembled. But despite all the hardship, his mother found one precious escape for them both: the movie theater, a magical sanctuary where young Al would sit in the darkness watching enormous shadows flicker across the screen, slowly learning that stories and characters could transform raw pain into something beautiful and meaningful. The Bronx streets were unforgiving and dangerous. By the time he was 13, everyone called him Sonny, a name that carried both affection and warning. As a teenager, he was running wild, smoking cigarettes, drinking cheap beer, skipping classes, and mistaking defiance for freedom. 3 of his closest childhood friends, boys who shared his laughter and his struggles, died tragically young from drug addiction before they even reached 20. And Al carried them like ghosts in his memory, knowing with absolute certainty that he could have easily followed them down that same dark path. Acting literally saved his life. Without discovering that outlet for all his pain and chaos, he later confessed, he probably wouldn't have survived at all. He dropped out of school at 17 after one final explosive fight with his mother and plunged straight into the harsh reality of street life. He carried groceries for strangers to earn coins, wiped windshields at intersections, and sometimes slept rough beneath windows that leaked light from other people's comfortable lives. He studied at HB Studio, an Obie Award, and got people in the industry talking about this intense young actor from nowhere. The following year, he won a Tony Award for Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie? And suddenly, the invisible boy from the Bronx was becoming visible. Then came the role that would change everything, the Godfather, in 1971, though the journey to that iconic part was far from easy. The studio executives didn't want him at all, dismissing him as too small, too dark, too ethnic, too unknown. They wanted a safe, conventional movie star. But director Francis Ford Coppola, who was fighting for his own survival on that production, saw exactly what others missed: a volcano of talent hiding behind stillness and silence. Coppola risked everything on Pacino and filmed the famous restaurant assassination scene early to prove his instincts were right. When Pacino sat perfectly still in that scene, his eyes hollow and haunted, then finally pulled the trigger, everyone watching knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. He created one of cinema's most iconic and unforgettable performances, despite badly injuring his knee during filming, pushing through the physical pain just as he'd pushed through every other obstacle in his life. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Diane Keaton was fighting her own very different but equally difficult battles. Born on January 5, 1946, in Los Angeles under the soft California sun, she grew up in a household where feelings were never discussed openly, where silence pressed against the walls like something heavy and physical that nobody acknowledged. Her father, Jack, was a decent but emotionally distant man, and her mother, Dorothy, had once been crowned Mrs. Los Angeles 1955, carrying dreams of performing and being seen. But those dreams slowly died under the weight of domestic responsibilities and societal expectations. Young Diane watched her mother's light fade gradually, day by day, year by year, not through any single tragedy, but through the slow suffocation of endless repetition, dishes and schedules and polite smiles masking a deep ache. Diane vowed fiercely not to let the same fate claim her. She was called strange and unruly as a child, but she was already building herself into someone who couldn't be ignored. Taking her mother's maiden name, Keaton, as her stage name, both at type. She split sandwiches with other struggling actors because neither could afford a whole meal, walked miles through snow to save subway fare, and kept pushing forward because fear itself became her engine, her fuel. Her breakthrough came with the Broadway revival of Hair in 1968, where she auditioned barefoot and trembling, but utterly alive, and the director told her not to change a single thing about herself. That night, standing under stage lights for the first time, her heart pounding louder than the drums, the silence that had imprisoned her childhood finally cracked open into song, and she felt truly seen for the first time in her life. When Al and Diane met on the set of The Godfather in 1971, something immediate and undeniable happened between them that everyone on set could feel. He was all fire and shadow and intensity, carrying decades of pain in his eyes. She was warmth and light and laughter, turning awkwardness into grace. Between takes, they sat on curbs outside sharing sandwiches, talking about their completely different childhoods, and discovering they somehow understood each other's deep loneliness in ways nobody else ever had. Their chemistry wasn't manufactured or acted, it was absolutely real, and it bled directly into the film itself, making every scene between Michael and Kay Corleone feel raw and authentic and heartbreaking. When filming finally wrapped, they could barely bring themselves to say goodbye, standing in doorways as if leaving would break whatever spell had been cast. What followed was nearly 9 beautiful, complicated years together, from 1972 to 1981, when they were both at the absolute height of their fame, and the world couldn't get enough of them. They walked through Central Park in the evenings, sharing a single cup of coffee, their hands brushing hesitantly. They cooked terrible burnt pasta in her small apartment and laughed about it. They read poetry out loud to each other until dawn broke. They built a fragile, imperfect paradise between film sets and red carpets and press tours. She would slip handwritten love notes into his scripts before filming. He would leave Polaroid photographs on her pillow with lines from Neruda scrawled on the back. The whole world fell completely in love with them as a couple, seeing them as living proof that real, authentic love could somehow survive Hollywood's brutal. They filmed The Godfather Part II in 1974. Diane realized with dawning horror that she wasn't just acting anymore when Kay left Michael. She was feeling and living her own accumulating heartbreak. Around 1981, after years of hoping things would change, she finally packed her bags one rainy night and left, whispering through tears that she simply couldn't keep waiting for him to want her completely and fully. He stood frozen by the window, paralyzed between pride and love, watching her white silhouette blur and disappear into the downpour until she was gone. Neither of them meant to hurt the other, but somehow they didn't know how not to. Years and then decades passed, and they both poured all their accumulated pain directly into their work. Diane starred in Reds, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, and Baby Boom, using every bit of her heartbreak to fuel breathtaking performances. Al threw himself completely into Serpico, Scarface, and eventually Scent of a Woman, channeling everything he couldn't express in life into his characters. When they reunited professionally to film The Godfather Part III in 1990, nearly a decade after their breakup, all the old feelings came flooding back like a dam breaking. But as Diane later said, life isn't a movie, and you don't always get another take, a second chance to fix what broke. Al later admitted publicly that she was the one who got away, the great love of his life, and that he regretted letting her go every single day. On October 11, 2025, Diane Keaton passed away peacefully at age 79 after a long, courageous battle with skin cancer. The entire world went into mourning for a woman who had shown multiple generations that imperfection could be genuinely beautiful, and that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but actually tremendous strength. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Broadway dimmed all its lights in her honor. Movie theaters everywhere played her classic films, while audiences laughed and cried, remembering everything she'd given them. For Al Pacino, now 85 years old and carrying the weight of decades, the silence of her absence was absolutely unbearable. He released only a brief statement, his words carefully chosen, calling her his dear friend, his light, and rather than applause, and that love, when it's truly real, can somehow survive even silence, distance, and time itself, becoming something eternal and unbreakable that lives on in every heart that witnessed it.